If you are a Christian and you are interested in attachment style, or you've been working through some attachment healing, hear me when I say that the enemy will capitalize on your fear of feeling your feelings. So all the bad coping mechanisms that we do as individuals usually come from some sort of attachment wound, right? There are traumas, there's triggers, whether we feel like we're not good enough, whether we feel like we are too good, whether we are terrified of rejection or abandonment, they all come from this place of these self-hindering beliefs that the enemy pounds us with these lies until we believe them. When we have a really good identity rooted in Christ, we struggle with these core wounds a lot less. But the enemy knows what these things are. And so he also knows that we're afraid of sitting in our feelings, particularly the dismissive avoidant who suppresses their feelings. But all the insecure attachment style will avoid feelings in some way, shape, or form, whether we do that with protest behaviors when we feel bad, whether we get bigger, we get louder, or whether we just disassociate and pull away and avoid the problem completely. So in order to avoid feeling our feelings, the enemy will distract us and lead us to different places to avoid those feelings. And they're usually bad. There are things like pornography. There are things like adultery. There are things like actually just sitting there scrolling on your phone, overeating, substance abuse, procrastination, throwing yourselves into distractions such as being a workaholic, only focusing on your hobbies. If you're a mom, a lot of times putting your children as the number one priority above yourself or your marriage, and really just throwing yourself into that as a tool of distraction. Drinking, I've seen exercise really actually be a distraction for people where they're over exercising to the point where their body is just completely stressed and they don't allow themselves time to rest or take a break. So all of these bad things that we tend to throw ourselves into to avoid our feelings and get these quick dopamine hits, instead of taking our feelings and giving them to God and sitting in them with Him and surrendering them to Him. All those things that I mentioned are ways that we protect ourselves from having to feel feelings that make us uncomfortable, that our brains are not familiar with and they don't know what to do with. So they cause dysregulation for us. And the thing is, in order to become more regulated in our feelings and to be able to hold space for them, we have to actually spend time in them. They have to become familiar to us. We have to spend time processing our feelings while doing nervous system work so that we're experiencing those emotional experiences with a sense of felt safety in our body, and actually using tools that create neurotransmitters to actually calm the body and tell us we're safe in these feelings. And we have to be able to trust that if God gave us these feelings, that they're there for a reason, and that even though we might need to reframe them and that feelings are not facts, that we need to be able to sit in them and try to figure out what's going on and to process them. So it's important that you understand that emotions are energy in motion, and so it's got to go somewhere. So if you just keep it stuffed down and you're using all of these different mechanisms to distract and to avoid your feelings, they're still there. It's almost like, I think of a pressure cooker, and at some point the top's going to blow, right? If you take a soda and you shake it up, eventually it's going to blow. That energy has to move somewhere. So it has to move out, and you have to do that in a place where there's a felt sense of safety in your body. A lot of times it's actually the fear of the feelings, not the actual thing, that causes more dysregulation in our bodies. So at some point, your subconscious has deemed it unsafe to sit in these feelings. These feelings are unsafe for you. And that's why we do some of the things that we do. When we're people pleasing, it's because our subconscious has told us that if we don't do this, and people are not going to like us, they're going to reject us, and then we're going to be abandoned. If we get defensive and then go to this place where we shut down and decide we don't need people and we don't need relationships, and that it's all just too much and it's doomed from the start. Well, the reason we're getting defensive is because we're afraid they're going to see us in our inner defectiveness wound and the parts of us that are broken and not good enough. And so we distract so that we don't feel that way. Or we throw ourselves into unhealthy situations like pornography or adultery or other ways to get these dopamine hits so that we feel better about ourselves and don't have to experience those feelings at all. Procrastination, if we have that as a problem, that's because we are afraid ultimately that deep down we're not good enough and we're going to fail. If we never even take a step to try, then we can't fail, and then we don't feel like we're a failure and we feel like we're inadequate and incompetent. Pornography is usually a way to numb from negative emotions that we don't want to feel. It's a distraction. It numbs the pain and takes away the shame until we have the shame from the thing that we're doing because we're trying to avoid sitting in our feelings and dealing with them. So what's the solution? The solution is to get curious about your feelings and what's going on in your internal world. For people who are dismissive avoidants, or people who typically avoid and really distract, and really it's very painful for them to sit in their feelings, you're going to have to do this in small increments. You're going to have to titrate up the amount of time that you can actually sit in your feelings and live in this internal emotional experience. For fearful avoidants who live in their feelings all the time, it's time to get out of your head and the rumination and actually move that energy out of your body. So what does that look like? That looks like you sit there and you bring your feelings to God, and you're able to sit in them and get curious about them. Instead of going into this place where you're panicking because these uncomfortable feelings are coming up, get curious, get acquainted with them. And again, if you're someone who's not used to doing this, you're going to have to do this in small doses. For fearful avoidants, a lot of times sitting in your feelings, you really sort of know what they're telling you and why they're coming up and what they mean for you. You can already draw that meaning from them very naturally. For someone who is really avoidant, you're not necessarily, even if you're able to process them and experience them, you don't necessarily know what it means yet. But you can bring those to God, you can sit in them, and you can allow Him to tell you what it means. You can pray on that. But that just looks like that you get curious about it. Why do I have this feeling in the pit of my stomach right now? Why do I have this desire to go and look at porn and shut down? Why do I have this desire to just sit there and scroll aimlessly, on my phone, when I know that I've got a list of things that I need to do to get done? Why am I procrastinating? And then all of a sudden I have this sense of urgency that I need to get everything done. And then I feel dysregulated and busy and like bad inside. Why do I procrastinate and then feel like is it because I'm going to fail? And so I'm afraid to get started in the first place until I have no choice but to do that. So really get curious about what's coming up for you in those feelings, whatever those feelings are, whether it's, anger, sadness, rejection. Get curious as to what's going on. Allow the feelings to bring you to the places that are broken, and then bring those places to God. Ask Him to search you and show you where you need work, where you need healing, where things are not okay, and ask Him to reveal those things to you. And then sit back and listen. Ask God to reveal to you how these behaviors that you're doing, the procrastination, the pornography, the substance abuse, the being unkind and avoiding your family, whatever it is, ask God to reveal to you how those things are protecting you and what they are protecting you from. Once you speak them out loud, once you take them, speak them out loud and hand them over to God, they lose their power. And then you give Him the power to come in and move on your behalf. The best place for the enemy to have you is in a place of numbness and shutdown and distraction. When you are distracted, when you are numb, when you are just operating based on your subconscious wounds without any deliberate, intentional thought or seeking God's will, and you're just responding and doing everything that you can to avoid pain or feelings because you're afraid of what that brings up for you and how uncomfortable it is, the enemy has you right where he wants you, because he knows that he can get you to do anything to avoid those feelings, where God says, bring them to me, let me help you with them. So if you are someone who is really struggling with this and really finds that you're doing negative things and bad behaviors and you don't understand where it's coming from, I approach this with both a scientific and a faith-based perspective in my coaching program. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching, you can find me on my website at www.lesliewellsconnectioncoach.com, and you can actually book there. You can also find me on other platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.